Darren, I think you and I would agree that there are 5 basic principles to conflict.
Yes, and I think going over the 5 is important to get to the point where we understand what conflict is. We can't understand the causes or how to resolve it if we don't understand really what they are.
That's correct. And a lot of times we believe we know the definition of something, but in fact, maybe we're a little bit off base or we don't realize what the origin of a word means. And so I think it's important for us to really explore what conflict is.
Right. I agree. And of course, the first thing to understand about conflict is that conflict's normal and it's not always bad.
No, sometimes conflict is the very catalyst that helps us reach a root problem and gives us the courage to deal with it.
Right. And, sometimes we have different opinions, different styles, so that's going to cause a little bit of conflict. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, it just means we have a different way of looking at things. We want to call it conflict, we want to say we're having conflict, and really it's just that we have a different opinion of something. Now, we certainly can let that go and the seeds can grow into conflict, but sometimes it's just a different opinion, and just because I have a different opinion than you, which has happened in other courses, I'll say, between us, doesn't mean that we don't like each other and doesn't mean that we're mad at each other.
No, and as a matter of fact, it enriches both of our viewpoints when we are willing to listen to each other and consider that. And conflict can take us to that place. Sometimes there are things that human beings believe, but they aren't willing to express it. Maybe they don't want to offend another person.
Right.
Maybe, there are fears that have developed even from early childhood that they're not even consciously aware of anymore. But for whatever reason, we withhold. And yet conflict can give us the emotional drive to actually bring that out. And if we learn how to do that in a positive way, amazing results can take place.
Right, because a lot of times our relationships are very superficial, they're very shallow. Now I understand that sometimes in workplace environments we can't have really deep relationships, but conflict helps us to deepen some of those relationships where rather than just knowing someone on the surface, if you have a conflict that you have to resolve, then your relationship will actually become better because you know each other better.
Yes, I agree with that. And the other thing I think about, Darren, is how boring it would be if we were all exactly alike. And yet sometimes the thing that makes us the angriest is because someone is different from us. So if we learn to really explore that, try to understand those differences and allow that to enrich our relationships, then we become more well-rounded, more productive, and we're able to do a greater good.
Right. And then there's this idea of dissonance. Now, a lot of times we have personal growth through dissonance. Well, that word, what does that word dissonance mean? That's not a common word necessarily.
No, and dissonance simply means a lack of agreement. Growth often occurs because the social turbulences around people cause them to look for a resolution, and therefore it results in a personal growth. When we get to that point, when we realize that, then we can approach conflict and dissonance in a very different way. But dissonance is simply just, not agreeing with someone else.
Right, and in the law enforcement realm, death investigators, law enforcement, EMS, because we have different personalities, well, we're all pretty well type A personalities, but because we have a few differences, things we believe in, some Democrat, some Republican, we got these social issues, there's conflict can occur. But a good thing about dissonance, though, is if you're sitting on a board, if you're sitting on the fire board, for instance, there's dissonance in the room. But as long as that's done constructively, decisions are made for the organization because everybody's view is thought out and talked about. So dissonance isn't bad. It just means I have a different opinion. I don't want to spend that $50,000 on this. Well, why? And then we talk back and forth, and then at the end, we come to a conclusion. And as long as those things are done and left in that boardroom, then dissonance is fine. Otherwise, if we have these yes men. All right. So if you have a leader and you have 10 guys under him that are yes men, you never get anything accomplished because it's always what the leader wants, whether it's right or wrong. So dissonance says, look, we don't agree. Let's talk it out. Dissonance is a fine thing to have. Doesn't mean that it's bad conflict.
Correct. And, one of the simple statements that I like to share so often simply says, let's agree to disagree. When we are openly communicating that and we all buy into that concept, and as you made note of earlier, Darren, you and I don't always agree on everything. We don't always approach the same topic from the same direction. However, we can respectfully agree to disagree, and we learn from each other, and we grow as a result of that.
Right. No, that's right. So, another point. A model of adequacy may appear to be contention when it is in reality it's conflict. So, what does that mean?
Well, this can be a really effective way to reach decisions, Darren. If a group in a room brings together their own personal passions, opinions, and they express them strongly, it can cause a disagreement. However, those very disagreements can be, again, that source to take you defining what the true problem is. So many times we focus on one thing, but we don't realize that that's not the root problem. But when people get passionate and they begin to express themselves, and there is a forum that facilitates doing that in such a way that it isn't just high emotion, but we actually have a structure to that, then it can help us reach the root problem, which then gets us to real results.
And very similarly, back to the idea of a board meeting or a group of people trying to discuss the problem. Kind of the same thing. All right, so the other thing is there is a right way to resolve conflict. That's another thing we need to understand about conflict. There is a right way to resolve it.
Yes. So often, what is human nature when we're in conflict with someone?
I'm right, and you need to listen to me.
That's absolutely, you bet. Another thing that we do when we want to be right is we want to surround ourselves with allies.
Right.
So we end up going to just about anyone who will listen, especially if we believe that person will support us, encourage us in our thoughts and our views. But in reality, one of the first best steps that you can take in dealing with conflict is go directly to the person that you're in conflict with. Confront the issue with them. Don't make it a confrontational issue with the person. Make it a confrontational issue with the thing, the topic, the source of your issue. But when we gather our courage and we do that and we go deal with the person, that helps us avoid a lot of additional ripples. We can prevent explosions. If we're not careful, if we go to too many other people in our attempts to gather allies, what we can actually do is destroy the whole. And we still don't ever reach a point where we solve anything.
Well, that's right. And if you go to the person and you cannot resolve the conflict with them, or it might not even be it might just be a misunderstanding. It might not be a conflict. I've many times went to people and talked about a situation, and I'm the only one with the trouble. They didn't even realize there was a trouble. See? So then it's like, I'm, apologize and we're sorry. Everything's fine. But if you go to that person and you can't get anything done, then bring a supervisor involved. Bring an arbitrator involved. Go to the next level. Bring somebody involved that can help moderate the conversation. The two of you sit down, tell your side. Somebody helps to come up with a conclusion. Because again, bringing in allies and raising your voice and fighting doesn't fix the problem. You still have to work there. You still have to work around those people. And if you can't work it out yourself, bring in a supervisor. If that doesn't work, then your only other option then is to file a formal complaint and follow those steps. The reason I bring this up is because if we have a small conflict with somebody, jumping to the filing a formal complaint step isn't the way to resolve it. No. Because you probably could have went to the person and it would have been a misunderstanding and concluded way before you got to all of the chiefs involved.
I agree, Darren. And also remembering that sometimes it isn't just what we're dealing with, but it's how we approach it. So if you go to someone in a confrontational manner, and if you are in an attack mode and you place them in a defensive mode, most often that is not going to turn out well. And you absolutely are going to end up quickly having to go to step 2, which is bringing in a supervisor or someone who is in an authority position. And honestly, many times that just leads on to the filing a formal complaint. But however, if we approach it in a manner of truly seeking to understand what the other person is thinking, what they're really trying to say and communicate, oftentimes we can avoid going to the next two steps. One of the things that I found that is very helpful and beneficial in that is, instead of making statements at a person, simply to ask questions and then stop and listen as they answer.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Well, now that we have a little bit of a basic understanding of what conflict is or is not, then let's move forward into the 5 primary causes of conflict.